I pulled into my driveway to find nothing but black oil stains where my pride and joy belonged. My brain refused the data. I had just finished an 80-hour week, and my $110,000 luxury electric vehicle was gone. My father, Douglas, laughed when I called, his voice a casual, dismissive shrug. He told me the car was now my unlicensed brother Tyler's property because, in his words, family helps family. He thought family loyalty would silence me. He was wrong. I did not scream. I called the police instead. This is where the story truly begins. Welcome to Turning Tables Stories channel. I'm settled in here with a fresh cup of coffee, enjoying the view and the morning stillness. It's in these quiet moments that we realize how quickly trust can fracture when personal boundaries are ignored. Where are you listening from today? And what's your favorite drink right now? Now, let's return to the moment my hard-earned life was treated like a shared resource. I stood on the concrete, staring at the vacant space where my car should have been. My brain did not register betrayal. It registered a system failure. In my world of data science, when a primary asset is unmapped, you do not weep, you troubleshoot. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb did not tremble. It was precise. I opened the manufacturer's app. It felt heavy in my hand, a digital weapon forged from 5 years of 80-hour work weeks. I watched the map load. A pulsating blue dot appeared. It was 3 miles away, moving at 45 miles per hour toward the freeway. I did not call my mother. I did not send a warning text. My compassion had been a luxury my family had overdrafted for years, and today the account was closed. I tapped the screen. Stolen vehicle mode activated. I watched the confirmation icon spin. The system was now overriding the internal controls. The steering would lock the moment the vehicle came to a stop. The ignition was disabled. The GPS was broadcast to an emergency server. I was the administrator of this asset, and I was revoking all guest access. Then, I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was professional, but I was the one setting the tone. I did not sound like a victim. I sounded like an auditor. I reported a grand larceny in progress. A pearl-white luxury vehicle, valued at $110,000, had been removed from my private property without authorization. I did not mention Tyler. I did not mention my father's emergency key. Identifying the thief as family creates a gray area for the dispatcher, a civil dispute that usually ends with a shrug and a recommendation to go to family court. By reporting an anonymous felony theft, I was ensuring an immediate, high-priority response. I provided the exact coordinates from my app. I told them the vehicle was equipped with remote lock technology and would be stationary within minutes. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill for Tyler's failures while I lived in a studio apartment. My father thought family loyalty would silence me. He thought the emergency key I gave him for fires or hospital visits was a master key to my life. He was mistaken. He had treated my hard work like a shared resource, but I was about to show him that his subscription to my success had officially expired. I walked inside my quiet house. I did not check the pantry for a bottle to numb the pain. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I was no longer playing the part of the supportive daughter. I was the lead architect of their consequences. I sat in the dim light of my home office, the only sound, the soft hum of my laptop. I was not waiting for the police to call. I was auditing my life. For 3 decades, I had been the utility player in the Rossi family drama. In sports, the utility player is the one who can play any position but never gets the trophy. They are the infrastructure, the plumbing, invisible, until they stop working. My brother Tyler, on the other hand, was the high-yield, low-return asset. 2 years ago, he requested $5,000 from my parents for what he called a ground-floor investment opportunity. My father, Douglas, did not ask for a prospectus. He did not even ask for a receipt. He handed over the cash with a proud pat on the back, telling me it was time we invested in real talent. 6 months later, I found the truth, buried in a pile of mail I was helping them sort. Those $5,000 had not gone into a startup. They had been liquidated into online poker debts. When I brought it to my father, he did not demand repayment. He told me to stop being hostile toward my brother's process. While Tyler was bleeding, the family accounts dry. I was living in a 400-square-foot studio apartment. The walls smelled like the neighbors' fried onions and my own desperation. I worked 80-hour weeks. I ate generic oats and skipped every holiday. I did it to save every penny for that $110,000 vehicle. It was the only thing in my life that did not have my father's fingerprints on it. People often ask why survivors of toxic dynamics stay silent for so long. They see the compliance and call it weakness. They do not understand the invisible shackles. It is a psychological mechanism called learned helplessness. When you spend your childhood being told that your needs are a secondary variable, you stop solving for them. You learn that silence is the only way to minimize the friction. My silence was not an agreement. It was a survival strategy. I stayed quiet, built my fortress of data and savings, and waited for the day I had enough capital to buy my freedom. Giving my father that emergency key was not about trust. It was the last lingering ghost of those shackles, a final attempt to be the good daughter he demanded. But today, the data reached a tipping point. I realized I was not a family member to them. I was a resource silo. They did not love Grace. They loved the stability Grace provided, so Tyler could remain a child. Douglas did not see me as a woman who had conquered the tech world. He saw me as a temporary custodian of assets that rightfully belonged to his son. The Rossi family was not a home, it was a predatory merger, and I was the only one bringing any equity to the table. I looked at the bank records on my screen. 5 years of invisible infrastructure. It was time for a hostile takeover. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk, a violent interruption to the silence I had finally earned. The caller identification showed a single word, Dad. I did not hesitate. I answered on the first ring, but I did not speak. I waited for the frequency of his rage to hit the line. It did not take long. His voice was a roar, distorted by the speaker, and a level of fury that would have once made me shrink into the floorboards. He screamed that the car had become a brick in the middle of a busy intersection. He told me it had suddenly locked up, the steering frozen and the dashboard blinking with emergency codes. He demanded to know what I had done and ordered me to unlock it immediately, because Tyler was stranded. I leaned back in my chair, watching the cursor on my screen blink with a rhythmic, clinical indifference. My voice, when it finally came, was a terrifying low register of calm. I told him that I was not the one who had stopped the car. The system had simply identified an unauthorized user. Douglas did not listen. He never did. He launched into a lecture about family hierarchy, his tone shifting from outrage to that familiar, suffocating condescension. He told me that, as the patriarch, he had already decided the vehicle belonged to Tyler. He said it was a family resource, and that my refusal to comply was a sign of a selfish, ungrateful daughter. This was the trap of normalizing cruelty. For Douglas, this was not a crime. It was resource management. Psychologically, he viewed his children not as independent adults, but as extensions of his own ego. In his mind, my success was merely a dividend of his parenting, and therefore, my assets were his to redistribute. He had spent years conditioning the family to accept this dynamic, using the family card to bypass every legal and moral boundary I tried to set. He truly believed that his need to prop up Tyler's failing image outweighed my right to my own hard-earned property. His arguments were steeped in a rusted, patriarchal logic. He reminded me that I was a single woman living alone. He asked why I needed a luxury, $110,000 vehicle just to drive groceries home. He told me I should find a small, compact girl car and leave the serious machinery to my brother. He explained that Tyler needed the SUV to maintain appearances with his wealthy fiancé. In his world, Tyler's dignity was a valid currency, while my financial security was a footnote. He then delivered the ultimatum he had used 1,000 times before. If I did not fix this and unlock the car, I would be erased. He threatened to disown me, to strip me of the Rossi name, and to bar me from every family gathering until I learned my place. I did not argue. I did not explain the law or the concepts of titles and deeds. I simply listened until he ran out of breath. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I realized that his threat of exile was no longer a punishment. It was a release. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and now the account was not only closed, it was being audited. I told him that if he wanted to help Tyler, he should look into the legal definition of grand larceny, because that was the only conversation the police were going to have with him. Then I hung up and went back to my spreadsheet. The next morning, I did not head to the data center. I headed to a glass and steel tower downtown to meet Sarah. Sarah was my college roommate, but now she was a high-stakes litigation attorney who specialized in uncovering what people tried hardest to hide. I did not walk into her office looking for a shoulder to cry on. I walked in with a thumb drive containing every financial interaction I had with my parents for the last decade. I need a system audit, Sarah, I said, setting the drive on her desk. I told her about the SUV, the oil stains, and my father's lecture on family resources. I did not lead with the betrayal. I led with the numbers. I had been the silent investor in the Rossi family for too long, and it was time to see where the capital was actually flowing. Sarah did not offer platitudes. She opened her laptop and began to work. While the police were processing the grand larceny report, we started a forensic dive into the Rossi family infrastructure. We were not just looking at the car anymore. We were looking for the why. Why was Douglas so desperate to move my $110,000 asset into Tyler's hands right now? The answer did not take long to surface. Sarah tapped a key, and a public record from the county clerk's office filled the screen. It was a civil judgment filed 4 weeks ago, State Farm Insurance versus Douglas and Patricia Rossi. It was a subrogation claim for $25,000. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the technical jargon. It all clicked into place with a sickening, clinical snap. Tyler had caused a major accident while driving our parents' car 3 months ago. He was unlicensed, and he was at fault. The insurance company had denied the claim, paid out the victim, and was now coming for my parents' assets to recoup the $25,000. My parents were drowning. Their car was likely totaled or seized, and they were facing a financial collapse that would strip away the high society image Douglas spent his life cultivating. They did not gift my car to Tyler because they wanted him to be a man. They stole it because they needed a shadow asset. They needed Tyler to appear successful so they could maintain the lie of family prosperity, and they planned to use my clean insurance record to shield themselves from the fallout of Tyler's latest disaster. They weren't just helping Tyler, they were cannibalizing my hard work to keep Douglas's remaining retirement funds untouched. To them, my $110,000 car was a sacrificial lamb to satisfy a $25,000 debt without them having to lose a cent of their own prestige money. They were going to bankrupt you to pay for his mistakes, Sarah said, her voice matching my own cold clarity. I looked at the judgment on the screen, $25,000. It was a drop in the bucket compared to the $110,000 they had just stolen from me, but to them, it was the end of the world. I realized then that my father's family first rhetoric was just a marketing campaign for his own insolvency. I was not his daughter, I was his contingency plan. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This was not a family dispute. It was an audit, and the Rossi family was officially deep in the red. Sarah's face shifted from professional focus to a grim, sharp intensity as she leaned into her monitor. She had found the digital trail, and it was uglier than either of us had anticipated. My father did not just use his emergency key to enter my home, he used it to invade my inner sanctum. The logs on my home office workstation showed a login from Tuesday afternoon while I was at my 80-hour-a-week job. He hadn't just used a key to my fireproof safe. He had exploited a vulnerability I'd forgotten to patch, a legacy passcode based on my late grandmother's birthday. He used my own past sentimentality as a backdoor into my digital life. He was not just resource managing my driveway anymore. He was committing a felony in the digital world. Sarah pointed to a series of outgoing requests to the state's digital title portal. Douglas had not only accessed the portal, he had uploaded a scanned, forged copy of my physical signature onto a digital bill of sale. He was attempting to bypass the DMV's verification system to execute an unauthorized title transfer. He wanted to move that $110,000 asset from my name to Tyler's name permanently. He thought he was smart. He thought he could bury the paperwork in the system, and I would not notice until the next registration cycle. This was not a family misunderstanding. It was a premeditated criminal conspiracy involving forgery and identity theft. The Family First banner he waved was just a smokescreen for the fact that he was a common thief. He had targeted the very assets I had killed myself to earn, treating my hard-earned equity like his personal piggy bank. Sarah looked at me, her voice cutting through the silence of the office like a scalpel. She told me that this was the kill shot. By attempting to forge a legal document, Douglas had crossed a line that the district attorney would not be able to ignore. It was no longer a he said, she said domestic dispute. It was a documented criminal act with a clear digital fingerprint. I did not feel the sting of betrayal anymore. I only felt the weight of the evidence. For 31 years, I had been the infrastructure of the Rossi family. I had been the one making sure they did not collapse under the weight of their own incompetence. And in return, my father had tried to erase my legal ownership of my own life. I thought about his laugh on the phone. He had mocked my career, my single status, and my groceries, all while sitting at my desk robbing me. The audacity was staggering, but my response remained clinical. I did not call him to scream. I did not send a threatening text. I simply watched the cursor on Sarah's screen as she finalized the evidence packet for the police. This was not a breakdown, it was accounting. I told her to include the logs from my workstation security and the screenshots of the unauthorized title transfer attempts. I looked out at the San Francisco skyline, the fog rolling in, cold and gray over the water. It matched the clarity in my mind. Douglas and Patricia thought they could liquidate my life to save Tyler's reputation. They thought I would continue to be the silent partner in their bankruptcy. They were wrong. I was no longer the utility player standing in the wings. I was the one closing the account and settling the debt. The Rossi family legacy was built on a foundation of fraud and exploitation, and as I watched Sarah hit the send button to the investigators, I realized that foundations like that do not just crack, they implode. I pulled up to my parents' San Francisco waterfront house at 6 p.m. It was a multi-million-dollar monument to vanity, but I knew the truth now. It was mortgaged to the hilt. They were house poor, living in a beautiful lie, while they couldn't even scrape together $25,000 to cover Tyler's legal judgment without robbing me. My mother had called it a family meeting, but in Rossi terms, that was code for a tribunal. They were waiting for me in the living room, a space decorated with the illusion of generational wealth that I now knew was a hollowed-out shell. My father sat in his wingback chair like a deposed monarch. Patricia was on the sofa, clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. And Tyler was there, looking smug next to his fiancée, a woman whose family name was worth more than my father's entire bank account. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. Douglas started the lecture before I even sat down. He used phrases like filial duty and family legacy. He demanded I unlock the car and drop the police report, threatening that I would be dead to them by sunrise if I did not comply. He called me selfish for prioritizing a piece of machinery over my brother's future and his chance to be a man for his new family. I did not argue. I did not yell. I reached into my bag and pulled out 5 bound dossiers. I placed one in front of Douglas, one for Patricia, and most importantly, one for Tyler's fiancé. "This is not a discussion," I said, my voice clinical and level. "It is a closing statement." I watched the color drain from Tyler's face as his fiancé opened the first page. It was the audit Sarah and I had performed. $5,000 in gambling debts, masked as investments. The $25,000 insurance judgment for the car he had already totaled while driving unlicensed. And the digital trail of my father's attempt to forge my signature for a $110,000 asset transfer. "He is building a legacy, right, Mom?" I asked, looking at Patricia. "Or is he just a high-risk liability you are trying to offload onto me?" The silence in the room was heavy. The golden child narrative was incinerating in real time. Tyler tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. His fiancée stood up, looked at the documentation of his poker debts, and walked out of the house without a single word. That was the power flip. The moment the predator realized the cage was actually for them. Officer Martinez wasn't there for a domestic dispute or a he-said-she-said family argument. He was there because Sarah had already delivered the digital forensics of the forged title transfer to the district attorney's office. The arrest warrant was already signed before I even stepped foot in this house. Just as the front door closed behind her, the blue and red lights of a patrol car hit the bay windows. Officer Martinez and his partner did not knock. They had been following the coordinates I had provided in my original report of a stolen $110,000 vehicle. They walked into the living room and informed Tyler he was under arrest for grand theft auto. As the metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the room, Douglas looked at me, his eyes wide and suddenly very small. He looked like a man who had realized his emergency key did not work on the law. I did not look away. I watched until they marched my brother out of the house. I was no longer the invisible infrastructure. I was the auditor, and the Rossi family account was officially overdrawn. I got my car back 10 days after the incident. It sat in the police impound lot under flickering fluorescent lights, looking like a survivor of a war I had finally finished winning. I sat in the driver's seat and gripped the leather steering wheel. The air inside was heavy and stagnant. Tyler had been trapped in that locked, bricked vehicle for nearly 4 hours before the police arrived, chain smoking and drinking in a fit of loser's rage. It reeked of stale beer and cheap cigarettes. It felt tainted by a presence that believed my hard work was a communal resource. I did not drive it home. I drove it straight to a high-end professional detailing shop. I told them I wanted a total decontamination. I wanted them to scrub every inch of the interior, shampoo the carpets until they were pristine, and condition the leather until the scent of the Rossi family was completely erased. I needed my car to smell like new money and absolute freedom again. While the shop cleaned the physical remnants of the betrayal, I was cleaning the legal ones. I followed through on the permanent restraining order against Douglas, Patricia, and Tyler. The judge granted it easily, after Sarah presented the digital logs of the workstation intrusion and the recorded threats from my father's voicemails. That piece of paper was a symbolic line in the San Francisco fog, a boundary that even blood could no longer cross. My father never understood that his patriarchal authority was an unmapped system in the modern world. He lost the waterfront house to foreclosure 3 months later. The desperate early withdrawal of his remaining IRA to pay Tyler's legal fees and gambling debts triggered massive tax penalties and a 10% IRS fine, leaving him with nothing to cover the mortgage. Uncle Mike and the rest of the extended family withdrew their support the moment they read the truth in those dossiers. Tyler sat in a cell for 90 days because no one in the family was willing to bail him out. My victory was not the arrest or the financial collapse of my parents. It was the silence that followed. I was no longer the invisible infrastructure for their dysfunction. I have come to realize that the most expensive lesson of my life was not the $110,000 price tag on my vehicle. It was the realization that you cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they are the ones holding the matches. Forgiveness is not always about the other person. Sometimes it is the only way to audit your own heart and set yourself free. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that your success is not a communal asset, and your boundaries are not a sign of a lack of love. You are not a resource silo to be raided for the sake of a golden child. You are the lead architect of your own life, and you have every right to protect the fortress you built. If you have ever had a family member treat your success like their personal bank account, hit the like button. Share this with one person who needs to hear that setting boundaries is not selfish, it is survival. Subscribe for more stories where truth finally wins.